There is a peculiar kind of unhappiness that modern life produces with surprising efficiency. It is not always dramatic. It does not always look like crisis. Sometimes it appears as restlessness, low-grade frustration, chronic comparison, or the quiet feeling that despite comfort, convenience, and constant activity, something essential is missing. A person can be productive, entertained, connected, and still feel vaguely disappointed by life. In A Guide to the Good Life, William V. Irvine argues that this dissatisfaction is not accidental. It emerges, in part, because many people are living without a clear philosophy of life. They want things, chase things, worry about losing things, adapt to getting things, and then go on wanting more. The result is a pattern that feels normal but rarely feels peaceful. Irvine turns to the ancient Stoics for an alternative. He does not present Stoicism as an academic subject meant only for philosophers. He presents it as a practical discipline for ordinary people who want to live with less anxiety, less bitterness, less compulsive wanting, and more steadiness. In this narration, we will explore the central ideas of the book and the modern version of Stoicism Irvine offers. We will look at why he believes people need a philosophy of life, what he means by tranquility, why desire so often undermines happiness, how negative visualization works, what the Stoics teach about control, adversity, pleasure, status, and relationships, and why this ancient way of thinking remains so usable today. This is not a book about becoming emotionally cold or detached from life. It is a book about learning how to enjoy life more deeply by wanting more wisely, seeing more clearly, and becoming less vulnerable to the mind's own habits of dissatisfaction. At the heart of Irvine's book is a question that sounds simple, but is rarely treated seriously enough. What is a good life, and how should a person live in order to have one? Many people inherit partial answers to this question without ever fully examining them. They are told, implicitly or explicitly, that a good life means success, comfort, admiration, security, pleasure, or freedom from inconvenience. But these answers often fail when tested. Comfort can increase fragility. Success can intensify comparison. Admiration can create dependency on approval. Pleasure can become repetitive and unsatisfying. Security can never be made complete. Irvine believes that one reason people feel unsteady is that their goals are too reactive and too culturally inherited. They move from one desire to another without a coherent understanding of what all that movement is supposed to add up to. The Stoics, by contrast, offered a philosophy of life. They had a destination, and that destination was tranquility. Tranquility is not excitement. It is not constant pleasure. It is not dominance over circumstances. It is a steadier condition of the mind, one in which a person is less enslaved by fear, anger, envy, disappointment, and endless craving. This does not mean life becomes flat or emotionless. It means the person becomes harder to disturb unnecessarily. Irvine finds this goal compelling because it does not depend on extraordinary luck. It depends more on training than on possession. You do not need to become famous, rich, or unusually fortunate to move toward tranquility. You need to understand how desire works, how judgment works, and how to respond to adversity and uncertainty without magnifying them into permanent inner disorder. The book, therefore, begins by shifting the definition of success. Instead of asking how to get more from life in the conventional sense, it asks how to become the kind of person who can actually live well with what life contains. One of Irvine's most important arguments is that people need a philosophy of life, whether they realize it or not. If they do not consciously choose one, they will still end up living according to assumptions. Only those assumptions will be borrowed from culture, impulse, and habit. They may spend years pursuing goals they never truly examined. They may become highly efficient at chasing what does not satisfy them. This is why Irvine believes philosophy matters in a practical sense. It is not merely an intellectual hobby. It is guidance for how to live. A philosophy of life helps a person decide what is worth pursuing, what is not, what to value, how to respond to setbacks, how to interpret success, and how to keep ordinary disappointments from becoming existential ones. Without that framework, life becomes vulnerable to drift. A person may be busy, but their busyness has no governing idea behind it. Stoicism appeals to Irvine because it offers such a framework while remaining deeply realistic about the world. It does not assume ideal conditions. It assumes life will include loss, inconvenience, mortality, conflict, aging, and frustration. Instead of building a philosophy around the fantasy that these can be eliminated, it builds one around learning how to live well despite them. That is one reason Stoicism remains powerful. It begins where real life begins, not where fantasy begins. Irvine's Stoicism is organized around the pursuit of tranquility. This matters because it changes the emotional structure of ambition. If your goal is to have more, impress more people, eliminate discomfort, and secure perfect outcomes, then your peace will always remain fragile. There will always be more to chase, more to fear, more to compare, more to protect. But if your aim is tranquility, then many conventional desires lose their authority. Tranquility does not mean withdrawing from effort or refusing all ambition. It means placing ambition inside a larger wisdom. You can work, create, love, build, and strive, but you do not make your inner condition entirely hostage to the results. Irvine shows that the Stoics were not passive spectators of life. Many were active, accomplished, socially engaged people. What distinguished them was not lack of involvement, but the kind of involvement they practiced. They participated in life without surrendering themselves to its constant turbulence. This is a subtle but transformative point. Many readers approach philosophy hoping to feel better, but Stoicism asks them to feel differently about what they are aiming at. Instead of treating happiness as the product of favorable circumstances, it treats peace as the result of disciplined interpretation and wise desire. The person pursuing tranquility becomes less captivated by social competition and more interested in mental freedom. They ask not only whether something is desirable, but what cost comes with desiring it. Does it create envy? Dependence? Anxiety? A fragile identity? Stoicism, therefore, becomes not only a moral philosophy, but a strategy for emotional economy. It teaches people to invest their concern carefully. A central theme in A Guide to the Good Life is that much human unhappiness begins with desire. We assume that if we can satisfy enough of our wants, happiness will follow. But Irvine explains that the mind adapts quickly. What once seemed exciting becomes normal. What once felt like more than enough soon becomes baseline. Then new desires arise. This is one reason people with comfort and opportunity still feel discontented. The mind is structured to shift attention toward what is missing. Irvine uses Stoicism to challenge that pattern. The Stoics recognized that trying to fulfill every desire is a recipe for instability because desires multiply faster than fulfillment can keep pace with them. If happiness depends on acquiring the next thing, then happiness keeps retreating into the future. The book, therefore, does something radical. It does not ask only how to get what you want. It asks whether your wanting itself needs revision. This is what makes the book more than a self-help manual in the shallow sense. It is not trying merely to optimize the pursuit of ordinary goals. It is trying to change the psychological logic by which those goals are pursued. Irvine suggests that a more reliable path to contentment lies in reducing unnecessary desires, weakening attachment to trivial wants, and becoming more conscious of how quickly desire distorts perception. This does not mean becoming ascetic in a joyless way. It means noticing that wanting is often less satisfying than we imagine, and that a quieter mind may enjoy life more than a perpetually hungry one. Desire, in the Stoic view, is one of the main routes by which the external world invades the inner life. To manage desire is therefore to reclaim freedom. Of all the Stoic techniques Irvine presents, negative visualization is perhaps the most memorable and the most counterintuitive. The modern mind often treats optimism as the habit of imagining better outcomes and avoiding darker possibilities. The Stoics take a different approach. To appreciate what you have, they suggest, imagine losing it. Think of the people you love as mortal. Think of your comforts as temporary. Think of your routines, your possessions, your health, and your conveniences as things that can vanish. The purpose is not to become gloomy. It is to become grateful. Irvine argues that one reason people fail to appreciate their lives is that they treat their blessings as permanent background conditions. Familiarity dulls appreciation. We stop seeing what is present because it feels guaranteed. Negative visualization reverses that dullness. It restores vividness by reminding us that what we now take for granted was never promised. This practice also has another function. It prepares the mind for adversity. When loss eventually does arrive, as it must in some form, the person who has occasionally contemplated it is less likely to respond with total disbelief and collapse. They have already accepted, in principle, the fragility of things. That acceptance softens shock and deepens gratitude at the same time. It allows a person to live more awake to the value of ordinary life. A meal, a conversation, a quiet morning, the use of one's body, the presence of a friend, all of these become more meaningful when seen against the possibility of absence. Irvine presents this not as morbidity, but as a discipline of appreciation. It is a way of wanting what you already have. Another defining Stoic principle in Irvine's account is the distinction between what is under our control and what is not. This is one of the oldest and most durable ideas in Stoic philosophy because it addresses a universal source of frustration. People regularly try to control things that cannot be controlled: other people's opinions, the timing of events, the certainty of the future, whether they are admired, whether they escape aging, whether circumstances obey their preferences. When those efforts fail, they suffer not only the event itself, but the humiliation of helplessness. The Stoics respond by narrowing concern. Focus on what belongs to you. Your judgments, your values, your effort, your goals, your responses, your character. These are not fully easy to govern, but they're at least the right territory for self-command. By contrast, much of what consumes emotional energy lies outside secure control. Irvine explains that Stoic peace does not come from making the world behave, but from ceasing to demand that it do so. This is not resignation in the weak sense. It is strategic realism. When you shift attention away from uncontrollable outcomes and toward the quality of your own action, you become less vulnerable to emotional whiplash. You can still prefer good outcomes. You can still work hard toward them. But you do not tie your dignity entirely to whether the universe cooperates. This principle becomes especially powerful in modern life, where uncertainty is constant and the temptation to measure self-worth by outcome is intense. Stoicism says, choose your response well, choose your effort well, and then release the illusion that everything else should obey you. Irvine also explores the Stoic practice of voluntary discomfort, another idea that can sound strange to a comfort-oriented age. Why would someone deliberately make life slightly harder when modern life already contains enough difficulty? The Stoic answer is that comfort easily becomes dependency. The more completely a person requires convenience, luxury, and predictability, the more fragile they become when those things are disturbed. Voluntary discomfort is a way of inoculating the mind against softness. A person might occasionally do without some comfort, accept inconvenience without complaint, or expose themselves to mild difficulty in order to remember that they can bear more than they assume. This practice is not self-punishment. It is training. It teaches that one's peace need not be perfectly synchronized with conditions. It also reduces fear. Many anxieties are sustained by the belief that we could not handle loss of comfort. When we prove to ourselves, even modestly, that we can, fear loses some of its power. Irvine presents this as a practical tool for modern readers. We do not need to imitate ancient austerity in extreme form. but we can benefit from periodically stepping outside the constant pursuit of ease. Doing so restores perspective and builds confidence in our capacity to adapt. One of the most useful parts of the book is Irvine's treatment of insults and criticism. Why do insults hurt so much? In Stoic terms, they hurt because ego makes them matter. We care about reputation, status, image, and how we are held in the minds of others. Once that attachment is strong, criticism becomes a threat. The Stoic response is not to deny that insults can sting. It is to examine why they sting and to reduce the conditions that give them power. If someone says something false, the falsehood does not alter your character. If someone says something true, then the truth may be useful rather than wounding. In either case, outrage is often less helpful than perspective. Irvine shows how Stoicism trains people to stop granting the judgments of others automatic authority over the inner life. This is especially relevant in a culture saturated with exposure, image management, and public reaction. A person who lives for approval becomes easy to destabilize. A person who values character over applause becomes harder to injure through opinion alone. This does not mean becoming indifferent to all feedback. It means becoming selective about what deserves emotional entry. Irvine presents Stoicism as a philosophy designed not for ideal conditions, but for the actual structure of life. Life includes setbacks, illness, interruption, disappointment, aging, and loss. The Stoic does not treat these as proof that something has gone uniquely wrong. Instead, they prepare for them in advance. This preparation changes how adversity is experienced. If you expect life to contain obstacles, then obstacles feel less like violations and more like occasions for practice. Irvine explains that the Stoics often saw hardship as material for virtue. Patience can only exist when something frustrates us. Resilience can only exist when something presses against us. Courage can only exist when something intimidates us. This does not romanticize suffering. It transforms its meaning. The question shifts from why is this happening to me to how can I respond to this well? That shift can be enormously liberating. It returns agency to the person without pretending difficulty is pleasant. Stoicism becomes not a denial of pain, but a refusal to let pain dictate the terms of one's life. Irvine is also sharp in showing how easily human beings become trapped by status and wealth. These are not always bad things. Money can relieve hardship and recognition can open doors. But both become dangerous when mistaken for the foundation of a good life. Wealth expands desire as easily as it satisfies it. Status amplifies insecurity because it depends on comparison and maintenance. The Stoic response is not necessarily to reject all possessions or ambition, but to downgrade their importance. Enjoy them if they come, but do not build your peace on them. A person who needs visible success in order to feel secure will remain dependent on unstable things. By contrast, a person whose main concern is tranquility and character can receive external goods without being owned by them. This is one of the most quietly radical parts of the book. It asks readers to resist a culture that equates more with better. Sometimes more only means more craving, more protection, more anxiety, and more distance from contentment. The lasting appeal of a guide to the good life comes from how usable it is. Its lessons can be applied in small daily ways. When something good happens, practice appreciating it as temporary rather than assuming it will always be there. When something goes wrong, ask whether the suffering comes from the event or from your interpretation of it. When you want something intensely, ask what price the wanting itself is imposing. When you feel offended, ask whether ego is enlarging the wound. When you are anxious about outcomes, return attention to what you can actually do. When life becomes too soft, choose a small inconvenience voluntarily and remember that you can bear more than comfort suggests. Over time, these practices reshape the mind. They do not make a person invulnerable, but they make them less easy to disturb. Irvine's genius in this book is that he takes ancient Stoic ideas and translates them into modern habits of attention. He shows that philosophy is not only something we discuss, it is something we rehearse, especially in the moments that test us. If we gather the book's core lessons into a few final truths, they would sound something like this. First, a person needs a philosophy of life, or else desire and culture will supply one by default. Second, the best goal is not endless acquisition, but tranquility. Third, desire unmanaged becomes a machine of dissatisfaction. Fourth, gratitude deepens when we remember the fragility of what we possess. Fifth, peace increases when we focus on what is within our control and release what is not. Sixth, comfort should be enjoyed but not worshipped. Seventh, criticism hurts most when ego is overfed. And eighth, adversity becomes more bearable when interpreted as part of life rather than as a personal injustice. These ideas are simple enough to understand quickly, but deep enough to practice for years. That combination is what gives the book its staying power. A guide to the good life endures because it offers something increasingly rare, a disciplined alternative to modern restlessness. William V. Irvine does not promise that Stoicism will remove pain, eliminate uncertainty, or make life permanently serene. What he offers is more credible and more valuable. He offers a way of living that reduces unnecessary suffering by reforming desire, strengthening gratitude, and directing attention toward what can actually be governed. This is why the book feels both ancient and fresh. It draws from old wisdom, but it speaks directly to contemporary dissatisfaction. We still want too much, compare too much, complain too quickly, and forget too easily the value of what is already here. Irvine's Stoicism answers this not with slogans, but with practice. It says that the good life is not hidden in some future arrangement of perfect circumstances. It is built through perspective, restraint, appreciation, and repeated training of the mind. In the end, the book's deepest message may be this: peace does not come from finally getting everything we want. It comes from learning to want more wisely, and from discovering that much of what makes life good was already present before we learned how to notice it.